The first thing Marin Cade noticed when she opened her eyes was that the ceiling was in the wrong place. It was closer than it should have been, pressed down at an angle like a drunk leaning on a doorframe. And there was something hot dripping onto her neck. Hydraulic fluid, not blood, good. She pulled herself out from under the collapsed service panel, one shoulder at a time, fingers finding grip on twisted metal that was still warm from the blast. Her ears rang with a sound like a fork stuck inside a bell. The emergency lights were on, amber, pulsing, the color the ship used when it wanted to say, "I am dying and I would like you to know about it." Marin stood. The corridor tilted. She grabbed the wall and waited for the ship or her brain to level out. Neither did, so she picked the more reliable of the two and trusted the wall. "Okay," she said to nobody. "Okay, okay, okay." The sulky mule was a freight hauler, mid-class, built for long routes through quiet space where nothing happened and nobody cared. Marin had taken the mechanic job 7 months ago because it was the most boring posting she could find, and boring meant safe, and safe meant she could sleep through the night without her hands doing that thing they did. The ship groaned around her like an old dog trying to stand. She moved, deck by deck. That was the training. Systems first, then people. You could not help the people if the ship was dead, so you kept the ship breathing, and then you went looking for pulses. Marin sealed the first breach on Deck 4 with a sheet of emergency polymer and 6 bolts she drove in by hand, because the power driver was somewhere under a wall that used to be upright. The polymer bubbled against the vacuum outside, held, and she moved on. The blast had come from starboard. Something had hit them, something big and deliberate, and the starboard corridors had folded inward like a crushed can. She rerouted atmosphere through the port ventilation shaft, a trick she had learned on her second week aboard, when the CO2 scrubbers had failed, and Captain Oren had told her to figure it out or start breathing less. Oren. She found him on Deck 2. He was sitting in the captain's chair on the bridge, which would have been normal, except the bridge had no roof anymore. The blast had peeled it open. Oren was still strapped in. His hands were on the console. He looked like he was concentrating on something important, and he was, Marin supposed. Dying was probably very concentrating. She touched his shoulder, cold. "You still have my wrench," she said. "The good one. The 12mm with the red tape on the handle." She stood there for 4 seconds. Then she sealed the bridge bulkhead from the outside, because the atmosphere was venting through the missing roof, and she could not afford to lose more air. The navigator, Pell, was in the corridor outside the medbay. He had been trying to get there. He had almost made it. Marin knelt beside him and checked, and there was nothing to check. She closed his eyes, because that was what you did, even though she had never understood why. "Sorry, Pell." She retied her hair. The elastic band had been sliding down all day, and she had been meaning to fix it, and now she fixed it, pulling the knot tight at the back of her skull, getting the loose strands out of her face. Better. She could see. The sulky mule had carried a crew of 5. Marin found the 5th member, Doss, in the engine room. The blast had ruptured the coolant line directly above his station. She sealed the coolant leak instead, because that was the job, and the job was the only thing between her and the kind of thinking she could not afford right now. 5 crew, 1 still breathing. Marin spent the next hour keeping the ship alive. She moved through it the way she always moved through machines, with her hands first and her brain second, letting her fingers read the metal, feeling for heat and vibration and the subtle wrongness that meant something was about to fail. She welded, she patched, she swore at a junction box that had melted into a shape that looked like a rude gesture. She rerouted the comms array 3 different ways and got static each time. No signal out, no signal in. She was alone in a broken ship in neutral space, and nobody knew she was here. Marin sat on the floor of the cargo bay and ate a ration bar that tasted like compressed regret. The cargo was fine. 60 crates of seed stock, 40 crates of water purification tablets, and the hot sauce, 200 bottles of Reaper's Reserve, bound for the colony kitchen on Threshold Station, because the colonists had complained that the food was bland, and Marin privately agreed. She was halfway through the ration bar when she felt it. A vibration, deep, rhythmic, coming through the hull plating under her legs. Magnetic clamps. Marin stopped chewing. The vibration pulsed again. A second clamp, then a third, locking onto the sulky mule's outer hull in a pattern she recognized from docking manuals. But the ship's autodock was offline. She had checked. Whatever was attaching to her ship was doing it from the outside, uninvited, the way a parasite finds a host. She stood up, put the ration bar in her pocket, tightened her tool belt. The airlock on the far side of the cargo bay began to cycle. Marin watched the indicator lights shift from red to amber to green, one after another, patient and mechanical. Someone on the other side had cracked the codes. Military-grade override, probably. The sulky mule was a freight hauler. Its security was designed to stop teenagers, not armies. The airlock opened. They came through in formation. 12 soldiers in full tactical armor, matte black, weapons up, moving in a synchronized pattern that covered every angle of the cargo bay in under 3 seconds. They were tall, taller than any human Marin had ever seen. Their armor was built for bodies with longer limbs and narrower frames, and the faceplates were tinted dark, but she could see the shape of their skulls underneath, ridged, angular, wrong in the way that meant, not from here. Korath. She had seen pictures. Never the real thing. The last one through the airlock was the tallest. He moved differently from the others, slower, looser. The walk of someone who had done this so many times that it bored him. His weapon was not a rifle. It was a sidearm, held low, almost casual. He raised it as he crossed the bay and stopped 10 meters from Marin, and pointed it at her forehead with the same energy a man might use to point at a menu item he wanted to order. Commander Vyeth Solarn. She did not know his name yet. She would. Marin looked at the gun, looked at the 12 soldiers flanking her on all sides, looked at the cargo bay she had spent the last hour keeping pressurized with spit and weld wire. She reached up and pulled the hair tie off her wrist, gathered her hair back, tied it tight. So, you guys the ones who shot my ship? Or is this a separate thing? Vyeth Solarn had conquered 11 species across 4 systems. He had overseen the surrender of planetary governments, the dismantling of orbital defense networks, and the quiet, efficient seizure of resources that kept the Korath hegemony fed for another season. He had done all of this with the same sidearm he was currently pointing at a human woman who was tying her hair back like she was about to do laundry. "Identify yourself," he said. His translator rendered it flat and cold, which was fine, because that was how he meant it. "Marin Cade, ship mechanic. Only one left, so I guess I'm also the captain now." She looked past him at the soldiers. "And the navigator. And the cook." She paused. "I was already the cook." Vyeth did not lower the weapon. "Crew complement. Was 5, now 1. You're looking at her. Weapons inventory. I've got a wrench somewhere, but honestly it might be under a wall. Distress signal status." Along with most of everything else, Marin tilted her head at his soldiers. "Hey, the 3 on the left? They're standing on a load-bearing panel I haven't reinforced yet. Could you move them about 2 meters that way before they fall through my floor?" Vyeth stared at her. She stared back with the calm, unfocused patience of someone waiting for a bus. He gestured. The 3 soldiers moved. The interrogation continued, and it was the strangest one Vyeth had ever conducted, because the subject kept answering every question completely, honestly, and with the disarming energy of someone helping a lost tourist find a street. She had no weapons. She had no crew. She had no way to call for help. She told him all of this, the way someone might list what was in their refrigerator. Vyeth kept waiting for the lie, the hidden card, the moment her eyes would change. It did not come. His science officer, Torin, moved to the cargo crates. Standard scan protocol. Energy signatures. Biological markers. Weapons profiles. The scanner hummed across the seed stock and the water tablets, and returned nothing interesting. Then Torin reached the hot sauce. 60 crates. The scanner flagged the contents as an organic compound, capsaicin extract, concentrated. No weapons application, no energy signature. Torin popped the seal on the nearest crate, lifted a bottle, and cracked the cap. He leaned in and inhaled. What happened next would be talked about on the Korath ship for months. Torin, a veteran of 6 planetary campaigns, a soldier who had once walked through nerve gas without flinching, because Korath respiratory systems were built for nitrogen-heavy atmospheres, and most toxins slid right off. Torin dropped the bottle, staggered backward, hit the wall with his full weight, and slid to the floor, making a sound like a kettle trying to scream underwater. His claws scraped the deck. Marin winced. Yeah, don't do that. That's Reaper's Reserve. It's for cooking. Cooking, Vyeth repeated. Food seasoning. We put it on things we eat. You consume this? Some people drink it straight, but those people have problems. Vyeth looked at the bottle on the floor. The small puddle of red liquid that had spilled was eating into the deck coating. His science officer was still on the ground, breathing in short, wet gasps. Marin walked over, picked up the bottle, sealed it, and placed it back in the crate with the careful tenderness of a librarian shelving a favorite book. He'll be fine. Just give him 10 minutes and some water. Milk would be better, but I don't think you guys do dairy. Vyeth did not give the order to help Torin. 2 soldiers did it anyway, dragging him upright and moving him toward the airlock. Vyeth watched Marin watch them go. She was concerned. Not for herself. For the alien who had just tried to catalog her condiments. He raised his sidearm and fired into the deck plate 2 meters from her feet. The shot cracked the metal open. A clean hole, glowing orange at the edges. The sound bounced off every wall in the cargo bay and came back bigger. Marin flinched, but she flinched wrong. Vyeth had fired warning shots at representatives of 11 species. Every single one had flinched away from the blast. Loss of balance, retreat, survival instinct pulling them from the source of danger. Marin Cade flinched toward the damage. She dropped to one knee beside the hole in the deck and ran her fingers along the edge of the crack. And the look on her face was not fear. It was the look of a surgeon watching someone spill coffee on an open patient. Oh, come on. She pressed her palm flat against the cracked plate, testing the integrity. Do you have any idea how long that weld took me? That's a structural joist under there. If that spreads, we lose pressure on the whole deck. She looked up at him, grease on her jaw, hair already coming loose again. Could you maybe not shoot my ship? It's having a bad enough day. Vyeth holstered the sidearm. Not because she asked, because the gesture had failed, and repeating a failed gesture was something lesser commanders did. He sent his soldiers to secure the bridge and the engine room. Marin was confined to the cargo bay under guard. 2 soldiers, armed, positioned at the airlock. She sat on a crate and watched them with the detached curiosity of someone at an aquarium. Vyeth returned to his own ship. Lieutenant Kesra was waiting for him in the command room. She was his second. Quieter than him, sharper in ways he did not always like, and the only officer in his unit who read xenobiology reports for something other than weapons vulnerabilities. Commander, she said, I pulled the species file. I read it. You read the combat summary. I read the origin data. She placed a datapad on the table between them. Their homeworld is classified Deathworld. Lethality Index 12. Vyeth sat down. There is no 12. The scale goes to 10. It went to 10. They added 12 when they found Earth. 11 is theoretical. A world where sapient life could evolve but probably wouldn't. 12 means it shouldn't be possible. The planet has tectonic instability, a toxic atmosphere by galactic standard, apex predators in every biome, microbial threats that mutate faster than most species can develop medicine, and a star that irradiates the surface with enough force to cause cellular damage. And they live there. They evolved there. Their bodies run on a chemical feedback loop, adrenaline and cortisol. Under threat, their cognitive function does not degrade, it sharpens. Their muscles recruit additional fibers. Their pain response suppresses. They become more effective the closer they are to dying. Vyeth thought about the mechanic, flinching toward the gunshot. Recommended course of action, Kesra said, is to take what cargo we can carry and leave. Do not engage further. Do not provoke. Do not test. Vyeth looked at the datapad for a long time. She worried about her floor, he said. Commander. I fired a weapon at her feet, and she worried about her floor. He stood up. We take the cargo, all of it. Begin transfer. Kesra did not argue. She was too smart to argue with him in this mood. But she pulled up the security feed from the cargo bay and watched the human sitting alone on a crate. Legs pulled up, arms around her knees, staring at a spot on the floor where something had been before the soldiers moved it. The human's hands were shaking. Then Marin reached up and retied her hair. Okay, okay, okay. And she started counting air vents. The two soldiers assigned to watch Marin Cade were named Drennick and Pole. She learned this within the first 20 minutes, not because they volunteered the information, but because she asked, and they were so startled by the question that they answered before they could think about whether they should. Drennick and Pole, she repeated. Got it. I'm Marin. You guys want the overhead light fixed? It's been flickering since the blast, and it's going to give me a headache, which means I'll complain, and I've been told I'm very annoying when I complain. Drennick looked at Pole. Pole looked at Drennick. Neither had been trained for this. They had been trained for hostages who cried, or fought, or went silent with shock. They had not been trained for a hostage who borrowed a step stool from the cargo stack and started rewiring a light panel while chatting about the differences between Phillips head and flathead screwdrivers. On my world, this is a whole argument, Marin said, standing on the stool, hands inside the ceiling panel. People have opinions, strong ones. It's like asking someone about politics except it matters. Your world, Drennick said. His translator gave his voice a metallic edge that wasn't there in the original Korath. What is it like? Marin pulled a melted wire free, examined it, tossed it. Depends on where you are. I grew up in a place with a lot of trees and a lot of rain and these little frogs that scream at night. Like, really scream. Sounds like someone stepping on a toy. Frogs. Small animals. They sit in water and yell. Why? Loneliness, mostly. What's the gravity like? It was such a natural question, slipped in between the frogs and the screwdrivers, that Drennick answered without thinking. 0.4 standard, he said. 0.4. So about, she did the math on her fingers, about 40% of what I'm used to. No wonder your ship felt so floaty when the airlock cycled. She glanced down at him. You guys must hate it in here. The mule runs at full Earth standard, 1G. That's got to be rough on the joints. We rotate shifts, Pole said. 40-minute cycles. 40 minutes, huh? Marin finished the wiring, snapped the panel closed, and the lights stopped flickering, steady and warm now. She climbed down from the stool and brushed her hands on her pants. There, that was bothering me. She smiled at them. They did not know what to do with the smile. They were still working on it when she asked if she could do a maintenance round on the lower decks, because the sulky mule was still venting atmosphere from 2 breaches, and if somebody didn't patch them soon, the air situation was going to become everyone's problem, guards included. Drennick checked with the bridge. The bridge checked with Commander Vyeth. Vyeth authorized the rounds because the alternative was letting the ship die, and he needed the ship intact until the cargo transfer was complete. Marin moved. She moved the way she always moved through the sulky mule, hands trailing along the walls, fingers reading vibrations, pausing at junction points to listen to the machine breathing. The ship talked to her, in its own language of groans and ticks, and the high, thin whistle of air finding cracks it shouldn't find. She answered it with weld wire and polymer patches, and the occasional creative swear. Drennick and Poole followed her. They watched her work. They breathed harder than she did. The air on the sulky mule was thicker than they were used to. Oxygen-rich, nitrogen-light, tuned for human lungs that had evolved to suck every useful molecule out of an atmosphere that was trying to kill them. The Korath respiratory system preferred thin, dry, nitrogen-heavy air. The mules' air sat in their chests like soup. She noticed everything about them. The way they shifted weight every few minutes because the gravity was wearing on their leg joints. The way their breathing shortened after 30 minutes and deepened after they rested. The way their fingers twitched toward their weapons whenever the ship made a noise they didn't recognize, which was constantly, because the sulky mule made noises that scared even Marin, and she had been sleeping inside it for 7 months. She filed it all in the part of her brain that sorted information by usefulness, a part she had not built on purpose. It had built itself, the way calluses built themselves, through repetition, through pressure, through a childhood spent on a world where reading body language across species lines was not a skill, but a basic requirement for walking through a forest without getting eaten by something with more teeth than seemed fair. On Deck 6, she repaired a cracked coolant line. Real repair. If the coolant failed, the engine would overheat, and the ship would become a very large, very slow oven. She fixed it properly, and Drennick watched, and she explained what she was doing as she did it because talking made people comfortable, and comfortable people answered questions. "What's your atmosphere mix at home?" she asked, casual as weather. 82% nitrogen, 11% oxygen, Paul said, low humidity. 11%, wild. We run about 21 on Earth. You guys must feel like you're breathing through a wet blanket right now. They did not deny it. On Deck 4, she rerouted an electrical junction, also real, also necessary. She also, while her hands were inside the wall and her guards could not see the panel she was touching, adjusted the atmospheric control valve for that corridor by 3%. Oxygen down. Barely perceptible. A human would not feel it for hours. A Korath might not feel it at all, not consciously. Their bodies would feel it. Their lungs would work a fraction harder. Their blood would carry a fraction less. Over time, that fraction would become weight. She did this in 4 corridors across 2 decks. 3% here, 2% there. Nothing that would trigger a shipboard alarm. Nothing that would show on a scan. Just the gentlest, slowest thinning, like the tide going out so gradually that you don't notice your feet are dry until you look down. On Deck 3, she found the emergency atmosphere controls, the master panel, the one that could adjust pressure, oxygen mix, and temperature for every section of the ship independently. She had installed a backup relay on this panel 2 months ago, when the original had failed. She knew every wire in it the way she knew the veins on the back of her own hand. She paused. Her fingers rested on the panel's edge. The security camera above the corridor was still active. She had seen the red recording light track her movement through every deck. Marin looked up at the camera. She smiled. It was not a threatening smile. It was not the smile of someone who had a plan and wanted you to know. It was smaller than that. Private. The smile of someone who had been looking for something in their pockets all day and just found it. She turned back to the panel, checked the relay she had installed, confirmed it was operational, and moved on. Fixed a leaking pipe on Deck 2. Chatted with Paul about Korath music, which apparently used frequencies too low for human ears, but could be felt in the chest, like a second heartbeat. Told Drennick about Earth thunderstorms, how the sky would split open with light and sound, and humans would sometimes sit on their porches and watch it for fun. For fun, Drennick said. It's beautiful, Marin said. I mean, it can also kill you. But that's kind of true of everything beautiful. 6 hours. She worked for 6 hours straight. Drennick and Pohl, he had read it 4 times now. One line glowed on the screen, highlighted by Kesra's annotation. Preferred predation strategy? Pursuit. The species does not ambush. It simply does not stop. Vyeth looked at the feed. Marin was fixing a pipe fitting on deck 2. She was humming something tuneless and soft. She had not stopped moving in 6 hours. He leaned back in his chair and felt for the first time in a career built on certainty the small, cold weight of something he did not want to name. Marin started at 0300 ship time, when the night cycle dimmed the corridors and the Korath guards changed rotation. She was on deck 5, alone for the 42nd time that day, because her current guards had stepped around the corner to swap shifts, and the new pair was still walking up from the airlock. 90 seconds alone. That was all she needed for the first step. She opened the maintenance panel she had been leaning against for the past 10 minutes, reached inside, and entered a 6-digit code on the atmospheric control relay she had installed 2 months ago and checked 12 hours ago, and smiled at on camera, because she had wanted Vyeth to see the smile and wonder about it and waste time wondering instead of thinking about what the relay actually did. The code accepted. A soft chime, barely audible, like a spoon tapping glass. Across 3 decks, the oxygen content began to drop. Not fast, not dramatic. The kind of drop that a human body would register as a slightly stuffy room, the feeling of a window that needed opening. Marin's lungs adjusted without asking her permission. 200,000 years of breathing in forests and caves and altitudes that should have killed her ancestors had given her blood cells that grabbed oxygen like a miser grabs coins. She could operate at 15% atmospheric oxygen and feel nothing worse than mild annoyance. The mule normally ran at 21%. She brought 3 decks down to 18. The Korath ran on 11% at home. The mule's 21 was already too rich for them, like breathing sugar. At 18%, the adjustment would have been a relief, except their bodies had already spent 6 hours compensating for the higher oxygen, and now the ground was shifting under their chemistry. Their lungs, already tired, had to recalibrate. Their blood, already working harder than it wanted to, had to decide what to do with the change. The answer for most of them was to get slower, to blink more, to feel a heaviness in the legs that wasn't gravity. Not yet, but soon. Marin walked back to deck 4. Her new guards, she hadn't learned their names, she was done learning names, fell in behind her. She was carrying a toolkit. She had been carrying a toolkit for 6 hours. Nobody questioned the toolkit. It was like questioning whether a doctor should carry a bag. Got a pressure seal failing on 4, she told them. If I don't patch it, we lose atmosphere in about 20 minutes, and that's bad for everyone who likes breathing. They followed. She patched the seal. It was real. She had loosened it an hour ago. At 0318 ship time, she reached the corridor junction between Deck 3 and Deck 4. The junction had 4 emergency bulkhead doors, one for each direction. The controls were inside a wall panel that she had rewired during her maintenance rounds, rerouting the trigger from the bridge console to a manual switch she had hidden behind a cable housing. She pulled the switch. 4 bulkheads slammed shut with a sound like God clapping. The 2 guards behind her were on the wrong side. They hit the sealed door with their fists. The metal didn't care. Marin was alone in the junction, and through the ship's internal structure, she could hear the muffled thunder of other bulkheads dropping, a cascade she had programmed into the relay, door after door after door, cutting the sulky mule into sealed compartments, like an orange being sectioned by a very patient knife. 12 soldiers, 4 groups of 3, sealed in separate corridors with thinning air and rising confusion. Comms still worked. She had left the comms active on purpose. They could hear each other's breathing getting faster. They could hear Commander Vyeth on the bridge demanding status reports and getting panic in return. Marin walked to the gravity control panel on Deck 4. The sulky mule had variable gravity plating, standard on freight vessels, because you needed to be able to adjust the pull in cargo bays depending on what you were hauling. Marin had spent 7 months calibrating these plates. She knew their range, their response time, their exact tolerance before the fuses blew. She set decks 3 through 6 to 1G, full Earth standard. The effect was not subtle. The Korath had evolved at 0.4G. Their bones were built for a world that held them gently. Their muscles were designed for a gravity that suggested rather than demanded. At 1G, every soldier on those 4 decks hit the floor like someone had filled their armor with wet sand. Weapons clattered against the deck plating, spines compressed. Drennick, on Deck 5, managed to stay on his feet for almost 8 seconds before his legs gave out and he sat down hard and stayed down, gasping, hands flat on the floor, like he was trying to hold the ship still. Marin walked through the corridors at a pace that was, for her, a stroll after dinner. The gravity was her gravity, the air was her air, the ship was her ship. She passed sealed compartments where Korath soldiers lay on the floor, struggling to lift weapons that now weighed 2.5 times what they expected. She did not take the weapons. She did not open the doors. She walked past them the way a farmer walks past a fenced field, checking, noting, moving on. Deck 3, Kesra's section. Kesra was the only one standing. She was braced against the corridor wall, legs shaking, every tendon in her body singing with the effort of staying upright, in a gravity that was crushing her frame, centimeter by centimeter. Her sidearm was up, aimed at the end of the corridor. She had read the species file. She had told Vyeth to leave. She had known this was possible in the abstract, and now the abstract was walking toward her with a tool belt and grease on its jaw. Marin came around the corner. No weapon, no armor, a hair tie that was slipping again, work boots that rang on the deck plate with the heavy, unhurried rhythm of a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history walking things to death. Kesra fired. The shot went wide, not because Kesra was a poor marksman, because her arms were shaking so hard from the gravity that the barrel drifted 4 degrees between the decision to fire and the trigger pull. The bolt hit the wall behind Marin's head and burned a black star into the metal. Marin did not flinch. She had used up her flinches hours ago. Kesra tried to raise the weapon again, and her arm failed her, the muscles giving out like a rope that had been pulled too hard for too long. The sidearm dropped. Marin caught it before it hit the floor. She looked at it for a moment. It was heavier than she expected, warm from Kesra's grip, and set it on a cable housing shelf beside the corridor wall. "Sit down before you break something," Marin said. "I'm not here to hurt you." Kesra sat, not because she was ordered to, not because she was defeated, because the voice was the same voice that had offered to fix the light panel, the same warmth, the same casual, unhurried kindness that made no sense in this context, and made perfect sense if you understood what a Deathworld did to the things that survived it. It taught them that everything was temporary. Enemies, allies. The difference between the two. Marin left Kesra sitting against the wall and moved to the bridge. The bridge door was sealed. Vyeth had locked it from the inside when the bulkhead started dropping. Marin did not try the door. She climbed into the maintenance shaft above the corridor ceiling, the one she had crawled through 100 times to fix wiring, and replace air filters, and retrieve the sandwich Pell had somehow lost in the ventilation system 3 months ago. She moved through the shaft on her hands and knees, fast and quiet, and dropped through the ceiling panel onto the bridge deck. She landed heavy. The deck rang under her boots. Vyeth was standing, barely. He had braced himself against the command console, his legs locked, his claws dug into the metal surface. 1G was destroying him in slow motion. She could see it in the way his spine curved, the way his chest heaved, the way his arms trembled with the effort of keeping the sidearm raised. The gun was aimed at her face, same as the first time. Marin stood in the middle of the bridge. Oren's bridge. The chair where he had died was still there, empty, the straps hanging loose. She looked at it for 1 second. Then she looked at Vyeth. "You could pull the trigger," she said, "but your hand has been shaking for about 40 seconds now, and the safety's been on since you braced against the console. So," she reached up, pulled the hair tie free, gathered her hair back, tied it again. The same gesture, the same pause. "What's actually in my cargo that's worth all this?" Vyeth did not answer that question. He answered a different one she had not asked. "We are dying," he said. The gun stayed up. His arms shook. His voice did not. "My people, the hegemony. There is a blight on our homeworld. It has been killing our crops for 3 generations. We have tried everything our science can build and everything our military can take. The seeds in your cargo bay, the water purifiers. We were not raiding for profit." He swallowed. The gravity pulled at his throat. "We were raiding to survive." Marin looked at him, the gun between them, the dead captain's chair beside them. She thought about Oren, the 12mm wrench with the red tape, the way he left his coffee mug magnetically stuck under the command chair, because he thought it was funny, and it was. It was a little funny, and he was dead, and she would never tell him it was funny. "You killed my crew," she said. Yes. The words sat in the air between them, dense as gravity, and neither of them moved, and the ship groaned around them, like it was trying to say something, and the scene held there, open, unresolved, a wound with no bandage, while the sulky mule drifted through empty space with its bones showing. Marin did not take the gun. She could have. Vyeth's arms were shaking badly enough now that the weapon was more decoration than threat, a piece of metal being held up by pride and nothing else. She could have stepped forward and pulled it from his grip, the way she had taken Kesra's, gently, the way you take a tool from someone who's done using it. She didn't. She sat down on the deck plate, cross-legged, 5 meters from him, and waited. Vyeth stared at her. The gravity dragged at every bone in his body, and the woman who had put him in this position was sitting on the floor like a child waiting for a campfire story. He lowered the sidearm. Not a surrender. His arms simply could not hold it anymore. The weapon rested on the console beside his claws. "Tell me about the blight," Marin said. He told her. It had started 70 years ago. A soil pathogen, something that had always existed on the Korath homeworld in small, manageable colonies, held in check by the ecosystem's balance. Then the balance shifted. The hegemony's industrial expansion had altered the nitrogen content of their atmosphere by a fraction of a percent, and that fraction was enough to let the pathogen bloom. It ate root systems, not the plants above, the roots below. Crops would grow tall and green and healthy and then fall over dead in a single day because there was nothing holding them to the ground anymore. 3 generations of scientists had tried to kill it. The pathogen adapted faster than they could engineer solutions. It learned to eat the treatments. It learned to eat the soil the treatments were mixed into. Korath agriculture collapsed, region by region, continent by continent, like a map being erased. The hegemony did what the hegemony knew how to do. It took what it needed from species that had what it needed. 11 conquests. 11 species stripped of resources, and left to rebuild. It kept the Koroth alive. It did not fix the soil. You've been doing this for 70 years, Marin said. Yes. Taking from other people because your dirt is broken. Yes. Marin pulled her knees up, wrapped her arms around them. She looked at Oren's chair again. The straps were still swaying from the vibration of the ship's struggling engines, and she watched them move back and forth like they were keeping time to something only the dead could hear. You're idiots, she said. Viet's head lifted. I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it literally. You are acting without intelligence. She pointed toward the cargo bay, 3 decks below them. Those seeds down there, they're not luxury items. They're not gourmet. They're engineered for hostile soil. Humans have been growing food in places that don't want food to grow since before we had writing. Salt flats, volcanic rock, frozen ground, sand that hasn't seen rain in 100 years. We grow things in poison because the alternative was starving. And we decided about 200,000 years ago that starving was not something we were interested in. She leaned forward. Your soil is broken. Fine. We've been fixing broken soil since before your species figured out space travel. You didn't need to raid anyone. You needed to ask. The word hung between them. Ask. Vieth had commanded fleets. He had dictated terms of surrender to governments. He had never, in his entire career, asked for anything. The hegemony did not ask. Asking was what prey did. Asking was weakness, shaped like a word. We did not know, he said, that humans could. You didn't check. You looked at a freight hauler and saw something soft and slow. You saw a class 12 on a database entry and didn't believe it because we don't look like what you think danger looks like. She tilted her head. We don't have claws. We don't have armor plating. We don't have fangs or venom or plates or spines. You know what we have? He waited. Hands, she said. She held them up. Short fingers, blunt nails, grease under every one. We have hands that can fix things, and a brain that won't stop looking for solutions even when the solution is stupid and impossible. That's the whole evolutionary package. That's why we're class 12. Not because we're dangerous, because we refuse to stop. The ship groaned. Somewhere below, a pipe fitting Marin had welded 6 hours ago, flexed and held. I'm not forgiving you, she said. I need you to hear that. Oren is dead. Pell is dead. Doss and Ronnie are dead. They were my crew, and they're gone. And you did that, and I am not forgiving you today, or tomorrow, or any day you're likely to be alive for. She retied her hair. The gesture was the same as every time before. Reach up, pull the tie free, gather, twist, secure. But the rhythm was different now, slower, deliberate. The punctuation before a decision, rather than the habit between crises. But I'm going to give you some of those seeds. Vieth did not move. Not all of them. The colony on Threshold still needs their shipment, and they're going to be angry enough about the delay without me showing up light. But enough. Enough to start a test crop. Enough to find out if human-engineered rootstock can survive your soil pathogen, which, based on what you just described, it probably can, because we've built strains that grow in actual acid. Why? Vieth said. Because you need them, and I have them, and that's how this works. That is not how this works. We killed your people. We seized your ship. I aimed a weapon at you. Yeah, you did. And I turned off your gravity and your air and locked your soldiers in boxes like luggage. We both did things today. Now I'm choosing to do a different thing, because the first set of things isn't going to fix your dirt. Vieth stared at her. She could see him trying to fit this into the framework he had built his life inside. The framework where strength meant taking, and mercy meant weakness, and the strong ate the weak, and the weak died grateful. She was not fitting. She was the wrong shape for his architecture. On the comms, Kesra's voice crackled. She had been listening. The audio feed from the bridge had been open the entire time, and every conscious Korath soldier on the ship had heard every word. "Commander," Kesra said. "Accept." Vyeth closed his eyes. The gravity was still at 1G. It pressed on him like the hand of something ancient and patient. He opened his eyes and looked at the human sitting cross-legged on the deck of a ship she had turned into a weapon, using nothing but air and physics, and the stubborn, impossible persistence of a species that had looked at a world full of things trying to kill it, and said, "Fine, but we're going to garden first." "I accept," he said. Marin nodded. She stood up, walked to the console, and began restoring standard gravity and atmosphere to every deck. The ship sighed around her as the pressure equalized, bulkheads cycling open one by one, the sulky mule unclenching like a fist, releasing. The cargo transfer took 2 hours. Marin supervised. She gave them 20 crates of seed stock, 10 crates of water purification tablets, and after a pause, 4 bottles of Reaper's Reserve. "For cooking," she said. "Start with 1 drop. I mean it. 1. 12 of them. Piled in a crate in the cargo bay." "Mechanic techs," she said when Kesra raised the question. The Korath ship detached. Magnetic clamps releasing one by one, each one a pulse through the hull that Marin felt in her feet. She stood on the bridge and watched through the viewport as the warship pulled away. Long, dark, angular, built for taking. Vyeth stood at his own viewport and looked back. The sulky mule hung in space behind him, battered, listing, venting atmosphere from 2 breaches that Marin hadn't gotten to yet, held together with weld lines and polymer patches and the kind of stubbornness that should not exist in a universe governed by entropy. He thought, Class 12. He thought, we walked onto that ship with 12 soldiers and full tactical gear, and she beat us with a thermostat. He thought, we never had a chance. Kesra appeared beside him. She looked at the shrinking shape of the freight hauler. "Commander," she said, "when we return, when we report this, what do we tell the hegemony about humans?" Vyeth watched the sulky mule until it was a speck, then less than a speck, then a direction he could feel but no longer see. "Tell them to ask nicely," he said. On the bridge of the sulky mule, Marin Cade sat in the captain's chair. Orin's chair. She had never sat in it before. The cushion was worn in the shape of someone else's body, and she didn't fit it right. But she sat in it anyway, because somebody had to, and she was the only somebody left. She pulled up the navigation console, set a course for Threshold Station. Quarter speed, the engines couldn't manage more. Ran a diagnostic. Started a repair list. The list was longer than she was tall, but lists were just problems organized into a line, and lines had ends, and she would get there. She reached under the chair and found Orin's coffee mug, magnetically stuck to the underside of the seat, where he always left it because he thought it was funny. She pulled it free, held it in both hands. It was cold. The coffee inside had long since gone to something that wasn't coffee anymore. She held it anyway. She held the mug, and she looked out the viewport at the black and the stars, and the empty space where 4 people she'd known should have been sitting. And her hands did not shake, and her eyes did not close, and the ship moved forward because that was what ships did when someone told them to. Marin Cade retied her hair. She put the mug on the console where she could see it, and she turned to the repair list, and she got to work. The sulky mule groaned forward through the black, and the stars didn't care, and the dark didn't notice, but the ship held, and the woman held, and somewhere behind her, a warship carried seeds toward dying soil, and the faintest, most improbable thing in the universe. A second chance, grown in dirt that shouldn't grow anything, by a species that had never learned to stop.